Hello, my name is Charlie Menghini, and before I share my presentation on podcasting and the virtual director, I take a moment to offer my thanks to Kevin Bieber, President of the Colorado Music Educators Association, and to the entire Board of Directors for all of the hours you have invested to make the 2021 Colorado Music Educators Virtual Conference a reality. Let me also thank Michael Paulez, Chair of the Technology Committee, and to William Kohut, your Colorado MEA Executive Director. Your conference theme of Stronger Together has never been more appropriate, especially during this time of the pandemic. Know that I applaud all of you for your commitment to keeping music alive and well in your communities, your schools, and in the lives of the students you serve. Let me also thank my friends at Boomer Music Company and thepodcastingstore.com, namely Drew Holmes and Ward Durrett, for their support in making this presentation possible. I hope that you all have a great convention.
Hi, everybody. This is Ward Durrett from Boomer Music in Fort Collins and thepodcastingstore.com. I am privileged to be able to introduce to you tonight Dr. Charles Menghini, President Emeritus and former band director at Vandercook College of Music in Chicago. And with him tonight, joining us is Mr. Donald Stinson, Director of Bands at Joliet Township High School in Joliet, Illinois, and also the host of the podcast series, The Bandmasters. And Charlie is the host of Band Talk with Charlie Menghini and Friends. Got a lot of really, really important information to share with you tonight in terms of how podcasting and the techniques used in podcasting can assist you in your remote teaching. So I will hand it off to Charlie now.
Thanks, Ward. It's a great pleasure to have this opportunity, and hello to all our friends in the Colorado Music Educators. I wish we could be there with you in person, but this is the best we're going to do during these wonderful times that we're all dealing with. So let me begin by also sending our thanks to you, Ward, and to Drew Holmes at Boomer Music and thepodcastingstore.com for making this session available to the folks in Colorado. Hopefully our presentation is going to be practical and something that will give you some ideas and some thoughts, some things to consider if you're thinking about starting a podcast, or if you're doing remote learning of any sort during this virtual learning time. And if you've got any questions about the podcast, we'll certainly share our email addresses with you at the end. I also want to welcome a young man who is going to be joining us for the podcast, and he helped me get into podcasting. He's one of my students, now a very successful band director in Joliet, Illinois, Don Stinson. Don, welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
We talk about podcasting, and I did a definition of what a podcast is, and it says it's a digital audio file made available on the internet for downloading to a computer or a mobile device, which is a big, long, fancy term for it's just a recording that we post somewhere and we send it to somebody. We can post it on the internet and download it, or we can probably just do it by email or Dropbox or something like that. But they're usually centered around a topic area, which yours have been and mine is. And our podcasts oftentimes are hosted so that a listener can go to a site, they can subscribe, they can get the podcast on a regular basis. But what we're really going to talk about is how during this time of virtual teaching and learning, the COVID pandemic, how a podcast series can help these people as teachers. And maybe we'll even identify some ways that once this passes and they go back to face-to-face learning, how a podcast can be integrated into their teaching or used for a professional development tool. So Don, tell folks how you got into podcasting.
Sure. About 10 years ago, I was working in a rural school district and out here in Illinois, and we have some wonderful professional development offerings with our state MEA, and we're extremely fortunate to be the home of the physical location of the Midwest Clinic every December. For me, though, I needed a little bit more professional development than just those 2 times a year. And I saw a need also to bring this information to my students and for me to experience and reference this material on our own schedule. So that was kind of the start of why I said, you know what, maybe I need to go out and collect some material and stories for myself to reference and for my students as well. Now, you have a little bit of a different story getting in podcasting, don't you?
Yeah, it was actually last year at the Midwest Clinic. My good friend Saul Friedgood, president of the Eastman Musical Instrument Company, and I were talking, and he goes, Charlie, he says, you need to start a podcast. And I said, well, what's up? He goes, well, he says, you're retired, all these people in the profession. And he said, it would be just great for teachers to give them some more insight, information. And he said, you'd be perfect for it. And I thought about it, and I said, well, it's a great hobby. Something I might want to do. So I did some research on it, decided I would take it up. And I've had a great time doing it. I mean, I really, really have. So, we got into podcasting for kind of different reasons, but, so why podcasting? Why not something else? Why aren't we doing something else, Don?
Well, at the time when I started, I was actually a huge fan of podcasts, and I was listening to podcasts of all different basically themes and subjects. And I remember thinking to myself, like, I really like this. There's broadcasting, but with podcasting, as some people refer to it, it's narrowcasting. We can really laser focus in on a very, very specific subject or story. So for me, that was a way for me to laser focus on a few items that were relevant to me as a teacher. I also thought, hey, when I start recording these things, if I put them out here, this is a pretty easy way for me to serve the profession. I work in a historical school district. We started around 1901. The band program started around 1912. So I'm really into history, into stories, and podcasting is a great way to actually create some history. You get this record that's something that you can use more than once and people can access repeatedly. And finally, I thought one of the greatest benefits was when I got into this, it was actually pretty affordable. All I needed was someone to record with and something to record it on. How about you? What are your reasons?
Well, for me, I like to, when I interview people, I want to give the listener an opportunity to really get to know someone. I mean, when we make a presentation, let's say at the Colorado Music Educators, like we're doing today, people are getting the information that we're giving to them. We have a topic, we're addressing the topic. And then people don't really know anything about Don. They don't know anything about Charlie. They don't know anything about Ward. And in my podcast, I want the listener to get to know the person, get to know when they grew up, when they started playing an instrument, how music became a part of their life, to really make them more human so that their story has more things that people can relate to, makes it a little bit more interesting. I think that's fascinating. It's fascinating for me. I've learned so much over the time by doing this, and hopefully the listeners really get to know the person, And so when I began, I started listening to other podcasts, kind of like you, and I just kept trying to find a topic or a direction that I wanted for my podcast to go. And as I was listening, I found out that, each podcast has their own unique style. There is really no set of rules that you have to follow. And that kind of gave me permission to have my own style. And it gives our folks listening their permission to have their own style. It should be different. That's what we want it to be. It's got to be like a piece of music. It better be different than the last piece you played. Otherwise, there's not a need for it, And so when I started, I asked a lot of questions, and I think people should not be afraid to ask questions. If you know someone who's a podcaster, ask them. I asked you a ton of questions, Don, because you had yours going long before I did, and it was really helpful. I asked some folks who knew some folks that were doing podcasting. I got introduced to a guy by the name of Jason Heath, who's an orchestra director, and he does contrabass conversations, and he was incredibly helpful. He spent probably an hour and a half talking to me about different things to think about and different avenues and all of those kinds of things. And of course, your podcast, the Bandmasters, Don, is just a great resource also. So, I think the thing is, people just need to start and just to try one. It'll be far from perfect, but they're going to learn a lot in the process. And in a few episodes, they're going to find their groove.
Absolutely. When I started, I almost thought of it like a band piece. And as music teachers, when we have a piece, we kind of have a goal in mind, how we think that piece is going to go. And that's what I did with my first podcast. I said, I'm going to begin with the end in mind. What do I want this to look like? What do I want it to sound like? Who do I want to share it with? And in my case, I had two goals. The first was, again, just wanted to learn about techniques and methods that could make my teaching better. and then would make my band better. And then number two is to create a record of conversations and stories with people that I really respect. I love mentoring student teachers and helping the profession out when I can. So my goal was to share with other practicing music teachers and alums of the programs that were being discussed. I think also if you're planning on starting this out, take an inventory of the stories that you want to tell or what areas you would like to improve on. Find people that excel in those areas. I was having a heck of a time with intonation with my band. So I started talking to people about what we could do about intonation. Consider, who do you start with? Maybe start with your own mentors. You follow that with teachers that your mentors recommend, and then you go on to maybe people that have presented at the state and national level or people that are outstanding in the field. But I think the best advice I could give anybody if you're going to start a podcast is just do it. Just get it out there. For me personally, I recognized that the longer I thought about it, the more time I was going to try to talk myself out of that idea. I said, I'm not the person to do this. I'm a band director. I'm not a radio show host. I'm not this. I don't have this equipment, etc. If you want to do it, you'll find a way to do it. And for me, I realized, hey, this first time around is not going to be perfect. In fact, there's some podcasts I've been listening to for 15 years. And their first episode doesn't even resemble their current episodes now. Those hosts had grown and developed and polished their product there. Listen to some of those popular podcasts, see how that goes. When I started the Bandmasters, I thought of the idea on a Friday morning, and then Friday afternoon, I booked my first guest. And we didn't even have a name for it yet. There was no name. It was just Untitled Band Podcast Project. But I just knew I needed help in my classroom, and other teachers could benefit from these conversations that I was having with other master teachers. Speaking of benefits, Dr. Menghini, what are you seeing as some of the best benefits of podcasting?
Well, I think one of the benefits is that you kind of get an opportunity to develop a plan before you get started. In my case, I always try to develop a set of questions or topics that I want to have addressed. And I share them with the person I'm going to be talking with in advance, so they kind of know what it is that I'm going to be looking for. So they're not necessarily caught off guard. I mean, if you're doing this with students and you're doing a podcast with students, you put out, hey, a day in advance. I'm going to be talking about these things tomorrow. I want you to be thinking about these things before we talk about them. And I'm going to be asking some questions, and I'm going to be asking your answers to these questions, So it doesn't, people don't want to get caught off guard. And I think giving them a little prep will be great. I ask them not to prepare their answers in advance. Just think about them and then let them go. And of course, the cool thing about a recording is that you can edit it. You can edit the recording and cut it down to a reasonable size, take things out that you don't want, things like that. How about you, Don?
I think there's tons of benefits to a podcast, but if I could break it down into a few, the one that I love is that there's no rules. You can create a 5-minute long podcast. You could create an hour-long podcast. Some of the podcasts I listen to are 4 parts, an hour and a half each, right? You get to decide how long you want it to be. I think also you can kind of have a little bit of a choice in who you want your audience to be. Do you want to speak to, other directors, or do you want to maybe speak to all the stakeholders in your district, such as students, parents, the community, or even other teachers within the district? One of the great benefits I've always found with podcasting is that it helped me to connect to people a little bit more and see these people that I really respected as people that went through what I might be going through now. One of the, I thought, best humanizing stories was there's a retired band director, Professor Ray Kramer from Indiana University. And I had all these questions for him, but my favorite part and my listeners' favorite part of the interview was when Ray Kramer talked about how he quit band when he was in elementary school and the band director had to drive to his house and bring him back to band. I thought, wow, I never would have gotten that story in some other capacity, I think. For me, the podcast, again, is most beneficial, me personally, as a personal tool. And I try to identify areas that I want more information or insight on. Or it's hard to do this, but I really try to take a big stock into, my weaknesses. What are my major weaknesses that I perceive in my teaching or that someone else sees in my teaching? And who is out there that can can help me with these specific situations. I think going on to kind of transition, one of the better benefits, I think, also in our profession with podcasting is how we can actually use it with students. So when we talk about students, it's kind of funny. I think sometimes our students' attention spans might be a little shorter, but I think my attention span is pretty short sometimes too. And that's where, when I look at some of these episodes, lessons, content, etc., 5 to 10 minutes has worked pretty well when I've tried to put some media out there that is either for learning or to enhance learning. I think podcasting with students is something that can provide instruction for something that I want students to do at home, or maybe an assignment that I want them to complete. I also think if done correctly, especially in this remote learning time that we're having right now in some states, podcasting is an avenue to develop a bank of lessons. This is great for beginners or anyone of that matter. You can develop a series of lessons on a particular piece of music. Sometimes music teachers have to take a day off. I mean, that's some wonderful sub-plans that are there as well. Big benefit, parents and students can listen to this together. I've heard from some of my parents that they listened to a couple of my episodes with directors that they had in high school, and they sat down and listened to it with their kid. I thought that was great. Personal connection. If you're creating a podcast for your student and you're speaking directly to them, and you're giving them a 5 to 10 minute lesson about a piece of music that you're very passionate about, with maybe some music sound samples cut in and out of that, I think that's a lot more effective and personal than maybe a Word document with links to a YouTube recording. Guest speakers. Perfect way to get guest speakers no matter where they're at in the country. And this is going to help maybe sometimes remove a little bit of the monotony from the class. Maybe your kids are tired of the same breathing exercise each day. If in that case, you get a guest host, record a podcast that helps lead students through breathing or daily exercises. We allow students to dig deeper into our content. Think about this. If you're programming a living composer, have those students reach out with questions and interview that composer and arranger. Record it, share it with your class and community. And finally, this is big in my area, is career readiness. Our students that are involved with podcasting, I think they're getting some fantastic technical, beneficial skills. They're contributing with research, interviewing techniques. They're practicing on audio and visual work. They're doing audio and visual editing. And some of our kids are even working on marketing and distribution. Dr. Menghini, how about you in terms of the student impact?
Well, Don, I think you hit upon some great points. And let me just piggyback on a couple of them. You talked about creating a bank of lessons. I was doing a podcast interview with Chip DeStefano, who's a middle school band director in Skokie. He has a great band program. And during this time, he's been taking every line of his band method book for the beginners, and he's been doing a little mini podcast or a mini lesson recording for each one of those lines. And he said, I'm going to bank those, and I'll have them next year. And if a kid misses class or is sick or the instrument's broke, they've got something they can go back and refer to. So I think that's a really, really important point. I also think the benefit is that you can solve problems that you want to address. I mean, you could put together a whole podcast on rhythm, a whole podcast on tone production, a whole podcast on breathing, little mini lessons that you can share with students. And I think that's great. And, you could do specific information for targeted groups. I mean, let's say that you have a clarinet professor from Vandercook. You get Ruth Rhodes in to do a clarinet clinic. You can share that directly with your clarinet students. So, I mean, there's all sorts of ways, it's just, you're only limited by your creativity and your thought, so you can share specific information. It can be with parents, it can be with administrators. You could put together a little mini presentation that you could share with the community. Put a link in your paper. Say, hey, we're going to have a program. Love for you to tune in and listen to the program. So there's a lot of things you can do. Your school board, put together a program for your school board. So I think it's important that teachers don't get hung up on the fact that it's a podcast and they're signing up for a life sentence of, I've got to do one of these every week for the rest of my life. I think they can make them, as you said, as often as they want to serve the needs that they have. And I think that's important. And I think even if you're doing live instruction with your students during this time, if you're face to face with them, why not record those lessons and why not start that? I mean, you may be getting some things there that you can really edit down for yourself at a later time. And you can ask students to make their own podcasts. I mean, what a great recruiting tool is to have your high school students talk about the importance of band with that for the middle school, for the beginners. This past weekend there was a football game on. This is probably a couple of weeks now. Once you guys are listening to this presentation at Colorado, but it was the Indiana-Wisconsin football game, and after the game. The reporter from ESPN was talking to the Indiana football coach. And of course, they're social distancing and he's on the field and she's in the bleachers. But as the players are running off, all the players are coming by and going, "Hey, coach, great job, man. Way to go, coach." And then a couple of guys are sticking their head and going, "Hey, you want to come and play for this guy? This guy's the best player in the world. Hey, come here. You want to play at Indiana. If you're a football player, you want to play." And it was like one of the greatest recruiting videos that was just spontaneous, because the tape was running. And I think putting together a recruiting video for yourself, reaching out to people that were in your program that are maybe at the next level at a college or university or in some sort of professional capacity. It's just great. Or students are doing podcasts for other students. Hey, this is how I practice. This is how I approach this piece of music. So I think it's limitless, And I think another whole thing, as you talked about earlier, Don, I want you to talk a little bit more about this, is how you use it for professional development.
Well, my district does a great job at professional development, but I know I might not be the only music teacher that says that. There's been some other places I've been where the professional development was geared towards everyone except the fine arts teachers. We'd get this big, long lecture, faculty meeting, etc. And then it was, English do this, math do this, science do this, music just go work on your own all day. So podcasting was kind of a great solution to some of those things. Podcasting, again, it's a medium. It allows us to tailor make professional development for ourselves and for our colleagues. I teach in a low income area, for example. So right now in my band program, 70% of our students need an instrument just to participate in the band. And we supply all reeds and we supply valve oil cleaning materials, etc. The kids, what do? They show up and they work their tails off. And I think they're just phenomenal. But in my area, I just had some specific challenges that came up with that. I grew up in the area, but things were a little bit different. And I thought, I'm alone. I'm not sure exactly what to do in this. And podcasting was actually kind of an avenue to the solution. I got to meet with other teachers and connect with them that had a similar setting and said, "Hey, I've gone through this before. Have you considered this? Or try this out." And lo and behold, it makes our job a lot easier and it provides this solution. It also helps us to provide an on-demand resource for those that need the help, maybe at another point. Every conversation has a key takeaway, and this has been one of the most beneficial things for me in my program as well. Because of my podcast, my students have enjoyed experiences such as commissions, guest artist experiences, improved leadership opportunities, just higher standards and better performances. I sat down with a director named John Thompson, who's retired from New Trier, during one of my episodes, and he told me he used to do this commissioning project, and he would get guest artists to come out. And that day I went back and I started crunching some numbers and doing some work. And in 3 weeks' time, we were able to commission a composer. His name is Jermaine Stiegel. And he came out and he wrote a piece for our band. And then he flew out from LA to conduct the piece. And then while he was out, he announced that he was working on the next movie. He's doing Coming to America 2 with Eddie Murphy. So, for our kids, they were like, "Oh my gosh, he was out there. He was a rock star for us." I've talked with Bobby Lambert from Wando High School. And in that 1 hour conversation, it helped me completely revamp our leadership program at Joliet. So that has been a wonderful way for me personally to use it for professional development. Dr. Menghini, how about you?
Well, I think it's a great way to introduce information to people who are totally unaware that they are unaware. I mean, we all have a colleague or we know somebody that probably needs some help in a certain area, and you just can't sit down and say, you know what, you don't have a clue about this. But I think you could put together a podcast with somebody and address the issue, and invite them to listen to it, and they might just pick up something. They might learn. It's a nice way to bring somebody along, to bring a younger teacher along without being bossy or out being too authoritarian. I think another thing is that we all have colleagues that are really good at stuff. I mean, they're smart. They've got good skills, experience, expertise in a certain area. Why not have them share that expertise with other teachers in your district or in the area through a podcast? And when you do that, you're certainly going to build a relationship with them and the collegiality, and everybody's going to benefit when that happens. I kind of alluded to this a little bit earlier, but you may have some former students who are still involved with music at the college level. Maybe they're professional musicians. Maybe they're teaching. Maybe they're just businessmen. They're doctors, lawyers, factory workers, whatever they are. But they were in band at one point in time. Bring them back and have them talk about their experiences and why it was important for them to do what they do. Because there's so many benefits to being a part of a music program, and they're lifelong benefits. That's one of the really cool things about it. And so go through your address book, think through people in the profession who and think what they might be able to offer, and don't be afraid to ask. And because, you talk about asking a composer, Don, you got to remember that if you ask a composer to speak about their music, they're talking about their favorite subject themselves, and so, I mean, it's a great thing. So I encourage people to take the chance, but to do that, you got to have some stuff to get going. You mentioned coming back and starting your first podcast, Don. So what should people think about when they want to get going? What kind of equipment should they have?
Well, I think they should think that it's not as intimidating as it might see. And the technology that is out there, especially, due to one of our sponsors, the podcasting store here, has made it so easy for people to get into this. So for me initially, I used a laptop and Audacity to record. It was a free program. But anything that you can record on, tablet, computer, phone, etc., you just have to have somebody to record with, and that's it. That next level, though, it certainly helps if you have a microphone. USB microphones today make it so easy to just plug in. If you want to go to that next level, you can certainly do small USB mixers, large USB mixers. You can get whole rigs and studios and everything. But I think for most people out there, that USB microphone is a great way to go. And especially in today's educational system, I don't think the remote learning thing is going away. I think even when we're back in person full time in some areas, I think we might still be looking at maybe those half days of remote learning. So I don't think getting a USB microphone now is just going to be a unitasker in that sense. I think you're going to be able to use it for many, many different resources and projects. If you are going into using microphones, like maybe Shure microphones or something like that, my advice, and this is just from my experience, is making sure that you don't cheap out on the mic cables. I've lost some good recordings because of faulty mic cables. But I think also in terms of getting started with this, the other advice I would give somebody is always have a backup. Let's say you got that USB microphone and you've got the laptop and it's running. Still, take out your phone and just take the voice memo thing and press record on that. If anything fails, you haven't lost out on what was probably a great conversation. And I think my final one, my mom growing up, she loved getting deals and everything. And I think that's the way to go too. If you find some used equipment or something that somebody lends you or that you rent, that's perfectly fine. You do what you need to do to get the job done. Now, Dr. Menghini, I know you started in a little bit different areas of equipment though than I did, correct?
Well, yes. When I started my podcast, and one of the other things though, that several years ago, I piloted an online class when I was still at Vandercook, and I bought a really cheap USB microphone, and I was kind of running things through GarageBand and stuff like that. And it was okay. And then when I started my podcast, I invested in a Blue Yeti mic, and that made all the difference in the world. And I winter in California. I summer in Wisconsin because I don't like cold weather anymore. My bones don't take it. So when I came out about a month or so ago, I contacted my good buddy Ward, who I've known, by the way, since 1978. Ward was working at McCormick's Enterprises and sold me my first set of drums for my high school band at Winnetonka High School. And so if you ever see Ward, anything he says about me in the old days, they're all lies. Isn't that right, Ward? Yeah, okay, good. So anyhow, so I reached out to Ward and I said, Ward, I've got to have some stuff for my podcast. And he turned me on to this Audio Technica microphone that I'm using now, and Audio Technica headphones, and they're fantastic. And, I had a story when I was first started teaching. And I worked with the principal, and I had to get a new baritone saxophone. So I went and he says, okay, he says, draw up what you want. So I put down, I said, I want a Yamaha baritone saxophone. I turned it in, and he turned it into the district bidding department. And several weeks later, this guy who I did not know showed up with a cardboard box. And I says, well, what do you got? And he said, I got your baritone saxophone here. And he cut it open, and the box was full of packing peanuts, and he pulled out a baritone saxophone. That's all it was, a baritone saxophone. It didn't have a neck. It didn't have a case. It didn't have a mouthpiece. It didn't have anything. I had a baritone saxophone. And I called the principal, and I said, well, I just got a baritone saxophone, but there's nothing with it. And he goes, well, let me call the guy at the business office. So he called him, and he called me back, and he says, well, that's all you requested. You said you didn't request a case, and you didn't request a neck strap and all that kind of stuff. And so I learned a lesson early on that I need advice. I need to call somebody that deals with this stuff on a regular basis. And I think the same thing is true if you're going to go into podcasting, or if you're doing remote learning and teaching, and you want to make sure that you got a good message and some good equipment, so that you have a good signal, so that you're proud of it. I found like podcasting is kind of like playing my trumpet. I mean, I play a Bach Stradivarius trumpet. I love my Bach Strad trumpet. It feels different. It sounds different. It plays different than it would if I had just had a student line horn. I think the same thing is true if you're getting into any sort of remote teaching or remote podcasting. It just helps if you have good equipment, Don. So I use I think a good microphone. I use Zoom to record my conversations. I use GarageBand to edit the audio. And if I'm doing video, I use a program called Movavi. It's pretty cheap, but it really works well. So that's kind of it. So Ward, what do you think about all this? If people are needing some help, can they reach out to you and you can kind of direct them in the right way?
Oh, absolutely. I'm really glad I couldn't get to the mouse fast enough to respond to your comments before. But yeah, what we do at the podcasting store, our goal is to offer educators the highest quality equipment we can to make their presentation just that, but give it that much more size and credibility. We had so many situations where teachers were just using a laptop mic and a laptop camera, and it comes across as really kind of thin. And this gives us the opportunity to help them out. There are also situations where teachers are going to come up with technical problems in terms of how they want to address a student, or how they can address a class, that they can call us or email us and ask those questions, and we can come up with a solution for them. So that's our goal, is to create the product so the content gets out there with the highest quality possible.
Yeah, Ward, we were talking earlier, and you mentioned this, that Drew has a son in kindergarten, and he set up a really cool thing. Share that with the folks. And I think this is a great creative solution that people can use.
No, they did. And it's by the way, the entire explanation is on the podcasting store website, but let me go over it with you. Drew's son is 5 years old, and he's in kindergarten, and they've been teaching kindergarten remotely. You can only imagine what an adventure that must be. And what the issue was is that they wanted to be able to understand what was going, and have a complete understanding of what was going on in the class. And what Drew came up with was he puts his son Timmy on a set of headphones hooked up to the laptop computer where he's getting his lessons. But those headphones go out into a Y jack, and the other half of that Y jack goes out into a Bluetooth transmitter. And so Drew and his wife, when Timmy's in kindergarten class, put on a set of Bluetooth headphones or Bluetooth earbuds and can monitor the class, both what the teacher's saying, what Timmy's saying. And because Timmy is on the headphones, his son's on the headphones, he's tethered to the laptop. which for a 5-year-old is so important. It solved both problems in terms of making sure the activity of the young person was taken care of, and the parents could address virtually everything that was going on in the class. And that was the solution that Drew came up with, just one issue in his own life. And we run into situations all the time where teachers are they run into issues that none of us have thought of because remote teaching is so new to us. But Don mentioned, and I will reiterate, I don't think remote teaching is going to go away. And so when you're thinking in terms of doing it with the highest quality you can, the equipment is a genuine factor.
Yeah. So Don, you got some takeaway points for our folks, because we better wrap this thing up here.
Absolutely. I think if you're wanting to get into this, determine what you need and or what you think would be beneficial for music education. I think also if you're going into this, have a plan, but try to avoid the paralysis by analysis. Eventually just start. We always have post-processing, and, as Ward was explaining, there are great people out there like Ward that also can help you just save time, and you reach out to him and he's just going to say, just do this, try this out. It's going to save you hours as you get into this. And I think the other big one, of course, is to remember that this is not a commitment. You're not answering to anyone with this. You figure out the schedule that works for you. I'm really proud of all of the episodes that I've put out with the Bandmasters, but if you look at my release schedule, sometimes there'll be 8 weeks straight where I put out an episode every single week, and then there'll be a 6-month spread. Why? Well, if you're a band director, you kind of understand that we have a busy time of year that typically goes from August to August, okay? So you do what you can with that. It's your schedule. You can do 1 episode or you can do 1,000. Dr. Menghini, what's your summary of today?
Well, I think that people just need to determine how best that recorded information, conversations, teaching lessons can help them and can help their programs. That's what it's all about. It's got to be a tool to help people. I encourage, before you jump in and start talking to somebody, to have a set of bullet points. Make a lesson plan, if you will, to help guide you and keep you and your guests on topic. And don't be afraid if it's not good when you start. Just hit record and go, and you'll get better over time. I think that's really all we can do. So I want to say thank you to our friends at the Colorado Music Educator Association, especially Michael Paulez, who is the technology chair for CMEA, and he's putting all this together. And Michael, we know there's a lot of work that goes on behind the scenes. Thank you for all your support and your leadership. And you deserve an extra scoop of whipped cream on your hot fudge sundae. But now that we're not there with you, you're going to have to do that yourself. So I'm sorry. I want to also thank my co-presenter, Don Stinson, just a bright young man. And Don, I want you to also tell the listeners, while we got him hostage here, you got a book coming out on teaching in a low-income community, don't you?
I do. I grew up as a low-income student in a kind of low-income area, and I teach at my alma mater, as I kind of mentioned earlier. And I did about a year of research on what's needed and what's necessary, and of course, kind of the synopsis of it is we just need great teachers out there that have very high standards for all of our students. But the book is published by GIA Publications in the spring of 2021. That's when we're anticipating release.
So thank you, Don, for being there. If you got any questions, you can contact me at bandtalkcharlie@gmail.com. And Don, your email address is?
Mine is donstinson83@mac.com. And if you want to check out the Bandmasters podcast and a little bit of what that is about, you can go to www.thebandmasters.com. And all episodes are free, or you can go to Apple or Spotify or Stitcher Audio or wherever podcasts are available. And to any teachers out there, just know that we are in your corner. We understand what's going on right now, and I certainly appreciate the great job that all of you are doing.
And my podcast is Band Talk with Charlie Menghini and Friends. And that's also available on Apple Podcasts or wherever you do your podcasts. And once again, a special shout out and thanks to our friends Drew Holmes and Ward Durrett at Boomer Music and the Podcasting Store for submitting this proposal. We're just honored to have the opportunity to share some information with you, and for their support and their encouragement. It means a great deal to me personally. And Don, I know just like me, the folks who are involved in music retail business, they understand the importance of teaching and what we're doing every day. And they're working just like us to get music in the hands of kids. So any final thoughts, Don?
Again, thanks for everybody for coming out to this. And, if you're able to do a podcast, try it out. It's not a commitment. Do a 5-minute episode. And I think you're going to see some great responses from that. And you might even have some fun in the process of it as well.
Ward, any final thoughts from you?
No, thank you guys. Some great information. We really do appreciate it.
Well, thanks everybody. And let us know how we can help. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.